What do you look for when it comes to a sequel? Expanded mechanics, bigger cast, more complex story? I suppose it really depends on what kind of games you like to play and the series in question. When it comes to something like Atelier, where we get a new game every single year, sometimes it can seem like nothing changes. I know some people find the modern games a bit samey, but I think there are many aspects that make them distinct, especially going back to the PS2 games before the modern formula for the series was established with Verona, and they were closer to what you expect of a typical JRPG. Atelier Iris 1 was exactly that, a typical RPG with very few surprises. A perfectly adequate story and cast, very basic turn-based combat, and a unique selling point in the form of the Alchemy system that didn't really sell itself to the player. It was a perfectly fine game, but not really much more than that. So where do you go from there? Surely the sequel released just 1 year later wouldn't be that much of an improvement. Heck, in North America there wasn't even a full year between Eternal Mana and the follow-up, Azoth of Destiny, so there's no way they would have improved upon the first game all that much, right? Well, they did. Azoth of Destiny is, dare I say, close to being a hidden gem of a PS2 RPG. Darn close. Yeah, we're just skipping all the formalities and digging right. Why is vibration called Quiver? The intro shows several characters that will be important later: a sinister-looking man destroying a bizarre device, a young woman getting into a fight that also gives us an immediate taste of the combat, a little girl standing alone on a floating platform, all ending with a pledge being performed by one of our main protagonists. This is Vize, and she's being sworn in as an official alchemist while her best friend Felt is off daydreaming. Welcome to Eden, a small floating island where mana spirits and the alchemists that partner with them live in peace. In this strange land, there's a mysterious ruin called the Belkide Gate and an ancient sword embedded into the ground known as the Azure Azoth that both exist with no real explanation. One day, a quake hits the island and causes several segments of Eden to disappear, whereupon Felt, at the command of a strange voice, pulls the blade from the ground and sets out into the gate to repair his homeland, waking up in a desert filled with monsters like he's never seen. Ooh, you smell that? That's... Oh, that might just be the scent of intrigue. It smells kind of like fried cheese and orange peels. I think this intro works very well to hook the player and get them asking questions. Rather than showing us very obvious elements and introducing us to Blandy McStickwhacker, wow, that doesn't sound right, it sets up a strange environment and hints at events to come while giving us a clear focus. Why is Eden floating? And what happened to all those areas that vanished? Why is this sword talking? What's the connection between Belkide and Eden? How long until Capcom gives us a Star Force collection? When am I going to review the Art and Ellico games? Sometime. I'll review them sometime. Subscribe and find out when. Before long, Felt meets the feisty redhead from the intro, gets involved with a rebellion group fighting against an evil empire, meets a dragon-hunting dragon man, and encounters an assassin wanting to destroy the Azoth. Just so much more going on here compared to the first game, and while the elements feel a bit busy at times, it gives you so much more to engage with once the intrigue of the intro is established. It still isn't an amazing plot. It really feels like a cheesy fantasy anime from the mid-2000s, what with the talking magic sword. Oh, I'm sorry, alchemical sword that definitely isn't magic, and an adventurous teenager exploring a strange world. There's an evil empire, because there always has to be an evil empire in fantasy anime. I'm pretty sure that was part of the Treaty of Versailles. One of them at least. Fortunately, all of these plot lines start fitting together before long. After helping out the girl from earlier, whose name is Noin by the way, we learn there's a very important man working for the Empire. A man with a talking sword, just like Felt's, except it's red and therefore evil, and now we know he's meant to be the main villain for the story. If you weren't sure that was the case, the guy's name is Chaos. Maybe his parents were fans of Sonic the Hedgehog, I don't know. Anyway,
Chaos
has been going around destroying strange devices like the one we saw in the intro, and they have some connection to what happened to Eden. So by going around and fixing these workshops, you can restore the missing areas of Eden, which relates to Vize's segments of the story. Alright, the game is actually split between Felt and Vize, with both characters giving the other what they need to progress. At the start of the story, Vize is given a set of share rings, because sharing is important, which are used to communicate and exchange items between her and Felt. Her side of the story is almost entirely set on Eden, and her segments are all about exploring the restored areas to partner with new mana spirits, allowing you to craft new items. We'll get more into the alchemy later, but in terms of story structure, this basically gives you a Metroidvania style of progression. Felt travels the land to battle enemies and restore the workshops, which grants Vize a new mana spirit, giving you access to new items that can be used in the overworld to find new locations. It honestly works pretty well, and it reinforces the bond between our protagonist as a driving force in the story. The connection between Felt and Vise is established at the beginning, and we see how they care for each other as the adventure plays out. Vise is shown to be truly concerned for her closest friend, even when she tries to hide it as he sets out on his quest, something Felt willingly takes on for the sake of restoring Eden and returning home safely. They even communicate through letters, which, you know, that's cute. I like that. The only aspect of this I'm kind of shaky on is how it's very clear they're meant to be romantic interests, but they're also basically siblings due to being raised together, and that's just... ew. Still a better love story than Twilight and Klain and Lita from the first game. Speaking of the first game, after looking it up on the wiki, I learned Azoth of Destiny is actually a prequel to Eternal Mana. Does that matter in any practical way? No? Not really. It isn't a prequel that answers tons of questions left by the first game or serves to elaborate on certain plot points a la Yakuza 0 or Snake Eater, namely because there wasn't much in Eternal Mana upon which you could elaborate. There wasn't a whole lot going on. It's closer to something like the Great Ace Attorney Chronicles, a detached adventure that does technically take place before the entries we know, but doesn't serve to enhance the rest of the series and instead just works as a standalone experience. There are some callbacks to Eternal Mana, such as a small number of returning areas, but I really don't see how making this a prequel tied to the story of the first serves to make either one substantially better. The biggest connection being how Iris, you know, the titular character of the trilogy that served as a major plot element in the previous game, is here as a kid. Vise takes her in after learning she has no home and basically becomes an adoptive older sister to her, and sure, it's neat seeing her, but it doesn't really matter. We see how she becomes interested in alchemy, something that would lead to the events of Eternal Mana, but honestly it felt like seeing Roy Campbell in Portable Ops. It's neat she's here, but why are you here, and why should I care? The most you'll get out of playing Eternal Mana before Azoth of Destiny is just understanding the little nods and references. Like when Max, the leader of the Simsiltian rebel group, calls Felt Klain. That was kind of neat. Honestly, I don't think you need to play Iris 1 to fully appreciate Iris 2's plot. Like I said earlier, the plot still isn't particularly complex or deep. It's still fairly straightforward once all the elements line up. What saves it is the characters, which are again a big step up from Eternal Mana. Okay, well, maybe not a big step, but, you know, a reasonably sized step. Starting off with Felt, who's actually a big reason why I think the intro works as well as it does. He's shown to be very talented at alchemy, allegedly being even better than Vise, but he doesn't have any interest in the craft. Instead, he's a daydreamer who wants to venture beyond the gate, which helps push the player to explore. The curiosity he shows towards Belkite and willingness to help whoever he can while he's there makes him feel much more fleshed out than Klain in the first game. Like, sure, he's still pretty vanilla as far as RPG heroes go. He's a nice guy with a very clear sense of justice and the drive to stand up for those he sees as being wronged. Not the deepest protagonist to be found in the genre. Really fits what I said earlier about the plot feeling very much like a mid-2000s shonen anime. Still, I think he's likable enough to carry the group. I think the same of Vise, being that nice, supportive childhood friend type who's mainly there to support Felt. Not much to say about her either, but I do like how she's meant to be just a bit jealous of Felt's alchemic abilities. This gives her the mindset that people should work hard for what they want to accomplish, regardless of nebulous concepts like talent, and you know what, I appreciate that. The rest of Felt's party are the one to get the most attention though. Noin is a tomboy with terrible cooking skills, working with the Simsiltians to free her homeland, which also brings her into conflict with her father Galahad, a high-ranking general for the Imperial Army. I think she's pretty fun as a character, although it's painfully obvious she falls for Felt early on, which really bugs me for reasons I won't elaborate on in this video. Gray is a dragon hunter who hunted so many dragons he was cursed to become a dragon. I shouldn't have to say anything more than that, that's just cool. Fee is definitely the one with the most attention given to her. You meet her as she's trying to kill Felt for the Azoth, but once Felt saves her from poisoning because he's just that darn nice, she learns the other Azoth is actually what she's supposed to destroy. You know, the one used by Chaos. She's an orphan raised by the members of Altina Church, a location that ends up being very important for the plot, but once she's freed of her ties to it, she joins Felt's group to destroy the Crimson Azoth and lead a free life. Later on, she learns in a really cheesy scene that she's the long-lost princess of the dethroned Slaith dynasty, and I honestly enjoyed how they handled her character after that. Again, none of them are super complex explorations of the human condition, but they're all likable and have some nice moments scattered throughout the overarching plot. Well, almost all of them. In the last video, I briefly mentioned how there was one character I just did not like very much. Norn was a squeaky-voiced cat girl who didn't contribute to the plot and just served to be annoying with her kitty comments and behavior. She got on my nerves pretty quickly, but I don't think I'd say I'd hate her as a character. She was just a bit irritating. However, Poe I hate. This little prick is a fairy living in Eden who accidentally makes his way to Belkite, and he is just awful. He's the particular kind of flirty ponce who kisses up to any girl he thinks is cute with the worst lines possible, acts like a jerk to everyone else, and lies about his accomplishments to seem better than he really is. And he has to lie a lot, because as you'll find out in combat, he is by far the worst party member. All his lines are either awful pickup garbage, whining about people not liking him, or complaining about other pointless stuff that annoys him. Delsus in the previous game was also a flirt, but he at least had a more laid-back personality, and wasn't a tool to anyone besides cute girls. Poe is just an irritating douche who even complains about getting married, which he has to do at some point in the game, don't ask, like he thinks he's Hugh Flipping Hefner or something and should just have a harem at the snap of his fingers. Like, there's an Imperial consul named Theodore who's a scumbag, but we're supposed to hate him, so it's fine. But even the other party members don't like Poe. It's canon he's just an unlikable idiot, and he's by far the worst aspect of the plot for me.
There's a ton of girls lined up to marry me. A fairy needs options.
Actually, Poe, she's really the only one. Trust me.
Fortunately, outside of that one example, the rest of the cast is just fine. Even Hegel is here, which... Wait, what? Okay, since this is a prequel, either Hegel in the first game was crazy old, or this one is his identical grandfather. Anyway, he's here, but Pamela isn't, even though this one character looks exactly like her. I swear, I thought this was Pamela for like a straight minute. Again, none of them are outstanding, but the ones that matter get some decent attention. Even the main villain has more going on than Count I want to kill the world because question mark from the first game. Doesn't really make up for his name being Chaos, but there you go. I also really like Galahad, this upstanding guy who loyally follows the Empire but hates how they treat the people. All in all, I'll give the cast a neat out of cool. The improved presentation probably has something to do with that. The character portraits look noticeably better than Eternal Mana's. They still don't hold a candle to Rorona Onwards, but at least they have more poses than before, and the quality is a bit more consistent. I will say they look a bit cheap, but I'd rather have this than whatever was going on with Hegel in the first game. Sprites are better as well, being a bit bigger and fitting more detail. They also got rid of that pitiful 3D overworld from Eternal Mana in favor of a map screen, which will probably look familiar to fans of future entry, and it makes overworld travel just so much easier. Environments look about the same level of detail, but they at least have more winding areas to encourage exploration. Oh, and also they have these pretty decently animated cutscenes. They didn't have those before. I certainly didn't forget to talk about that until I was editing the section just now. No, not at all. The only aspect of the presentation I think Iris 1 has over Iris 2 is the soundtrack. I don't know, I just didn't get much from the tunes in this one. Nothing terrible, but I'm not gonna remember any tracks from this. The only thing I think has remained around the same level is the voice acting. It's still just okay, and it still has a surprising number of familiar voices if you're a nerd like me and actually pay attention to that stuff. Feld is played by Spike Spencer, whom you'll recognize as the whiniest little loser twerp of the 90s, Shinji Ikari from Evangelion. Fortunately, he also voiced someone I like, Ginta from Mare. Anyone else remember that show? That show was cool. Vize is played by the prolific Michelle Ruff, best known as Rukia Kuchiki in Bleach, Yukari Takaba and Sadao Kawakami from Persona, the best character in Haruhi, and Princess Snow and Koyuki from Mare. Wow, that's a coincidence and a half. Chaos is actually played by Liam O'Brien, known as everyone's favorite Green Day-looking redhead, Akihiko Sanada, War from Darksiders, Wise from Nier. You know what? You know who Liam O'Brien is. Honestly, his performance is my favorite. He's hamming it up like ham's going out of style, and the only way to save it is with cheese.
I don't need a history lesson. All I need is the power of mana and knowledge of alchemy.
I will say it's kind of annoying looking up the voices for these games since they aren't listed in the credits. Even online databases like IMDb and Behind the Voice Actors don't know who played the English voices for Fee, Iris, Telena, or Uveria. If anyone knows, leave a comment. I'd certainly appreciate it. Then there's the combat, and oh boy, the combat. It is so much better than Iris 1's, and it all has to do with these two little meters up on the top of the screen. These are the time gauge and the skill gauge, and they add just enough complexity to the combat to make it more engaging without being so overwhelming. Let's start with the skill gauge. But first, notice anything wrong? Look at the battle screen, specifically the party stats. Yep, there's no MP, just HP. That's because your skills are now tied to this little meter, which can be charged up with one of your basic attacks, or by getting attacked. you no longer have a single basic attack, instead you have a charge attack and a break attack, which are tied to either gauge. At the start of a battle, you get one full stock of the skill gauge and can charge it by a half stock with one charge attack, while taking damage fills it up about 1/4 of the way. Once you've built up enough, a character can spend the meter for their skills ranging from 1 to 3 depending on its power. Honestly, it kind of reminds me of the gem system from Voice of Cards, but you have to build it up here instead of getting one stock per turn by default. This means you don't have to bother with stuff like mana potions or running low for one character. It's a rechargeable shared resource for the whole party. As for the time gauge, it's tied to your break attack. This is your other basic move, and it doesn't charge the meter. Instead, it lets you knock opponents back down the time gauge, delaying their turn. If you knock them back into the yellow zone, they become broken. When this happens, all attacks you perform against any opponent performs a chain combo, letting you gain additional experience the more damage you deal. This is another great addition to the gameplay since it gives you a chance for faster leveling and is still shared by all party members, whether or not they're involved in battle. And let me tell you, if you use a break attack and then use Fee's attack Endless Blades, you just get so much stuff. It's ridiculous. Choosing to use a break attack is useful for spacing out enemy turns, letting your party members take another turn before an opponent. A character's speed determines how quickly they move down the time gauge, so they move at different rates, and the order can change from the starting one if someone is fast enough. Being able to manipulate a pseudo turn order like this is a great bit of strategy, and it's nicely balanced by the fact repeated break attacks will set opponents back less each time. But if you pace them out correctly, it's possible to make it so an enemy just never gets a turn. This dichotomy between break and charge attack is what makes combat, the strategy of managing both shifting turn order and charging your party's skills. Since each character can only perform one kind of basic attack at a time, you have to take more into consideration, not just spam skills as much as you can while refilling them outside of battle. I really like this, since it prevents you from spamming skills while making them more tactical, since you need to wait a good while between uses. It also makes your alchemy items more useful in combat, since they let you deal bigger damage at the cost of not charging skill gauge or knocking back enemy turns. On the bright side, every character can use alchemy items this time instead of just the main character, and it's a good alternative to basic attacks when you're charging skills. Oh, and those skills, they're unlocked just such a cool way. See, a character's skills are tied to what weapons they're using, and winning fights gains them skill points in addition to regular experience. Once you gain those skill points to master an ability, the character gains it permanently unless you move on to the next weapon, which is made through weapon alchemy. In the first game, this was honestly pretty useless. It was just a way to make minor upgrades to weapons I barely ever found, but just like everything else in Iris 2, this is a noticeable improvement. Each party member has a unique weapon path with a few splits to let you upgrade how you like, but you can move between paths as you feel. All it takes to upgrade to the next gear is a specific item and a mana spirit, which still ties back to Vise's side. It really is more of a level up system than a customizing one, but I like how you can choose your way to progress through each tree. You also have 2 slots for alchemy items that give you passive skills like block or extra attacks, and they work the same way as weapon skills. It gives you so much more to work with when it comes to fine-tuning your stats, which is just, Can you tell I like Iris 2's gameplay yet? Because I do, like a lot. Sure, just like the plot, these systems aren't complex or super unique, but they're executed well. And I haven't even gotten to the alchemy yet. Remember those different alchemy methods I described in the previous video? Mana synthesis was fine, the weapon synthesis was boring, but shop alchemy was by far the best. Well, now the alchemy is pretty much an improved version of what you found in shops. Vise gets new recipes from books you find across the worlds and must create them from ingredients in her workshop. The 3 categories are mana items, accessories, and alchemy items. Once Vise makes a mana item, she and Felt can recreate it through mana synthesis as many times as they want, which is a good middle ground between the first game's convenience and the experimentation of later games. However, only Vise can make accessories and alchemy items, which is a nice trade-off. This is the kind of alchemy I'm wanting from these games, always letting me find new items in chests or stores to encourage explorations and keeping me curious for what I can find next. By the way, if you played this after watching this video, here's a tip. Make everyone lotta cake. It's crazy how a cake is one of the best early to mid-game accessories. I guess it's just a really good cake. The only minor issue I have with it is how you can't break down inventory items for elements anymore, so there are times where I was running low on a kind of element and had no choice but to hope I found some in the nearby environment, which wasn't always the case. Bit annoying, but man, the rest of the system is just so much better. I can't count off that much for something so minor. Okay, is that everything? Plot, characters, presentation, combat, alchemy. I sure hope I'm not missing anything here because I really want to convey just how much I like this game. Is it cliche? Absolutely. Is it particularly original or deep or compelling? not really, no. Is it fun if you're a fan of JRPGs in this style? Most definitely. Atelier Iris 2 Azoth of Destiny is a game that's just such a good time if you're in the mood for what it offers. A straightforward but competently executed adventure with solid gameplay mechanics and appealing characters, with one major exception. It's actually a bit jarring to go from Iris 1 to 2. Nearly everything is so much better in my opinion, and considering how negligible the whole prequel context is for the plot, I don't think you even need to play the first game. Unless you're a dork like me and have to play all the games in this exhaustingly long franchise. But unlike Eternal Mana, where I think you'll only get the most out of it by going back as an established fan to admire the differences between it and modern titles, Azoth of Destiny stands well on its own merits. Now excuse me while I pull up video games YouTubles by making a food analogy. Atelier Iris 2 Azoth of Destiny is like a really good bowl of potato soup. It's extremely familiar, maybe a bit bland in certain aspects, but it's cozy and satisfying, and that's all you need sometimes. As I like to say, not everything needs to be this amazing, life-altering experience to be worth playing. Heck, that kind of describes Atelier as a whole. And that's why I say Atelier Iris 2 is close to a hidden gem. It isn't spectacular, it isn't so out there you need to play it just to experience its ideas. It's just a decent game done well, and I don't think it gets enough attention. Granted, it probably doesn't get much attention because it's an Atelier game, but by the standards of this lovely little series, it's pretty good. If I were to pull another Vadigoom's YouTube Blues and make a tier list, it would be firmly in, like, mid-B tier, which, you know, is still fairly above average. For the record, Eternal Mana would be like mid-low C, maybe. So yeah, Azoth of Destiny, pretty solid. Definitely worth playing if you'd like to try the older Atelier games and don't know the Mana Chemia titles exist. Yes, we'll get to those someday. I'm glad I finally got around to finishing it and seeing the rest of the experience lives up to what I remember of the start. We only have one game left in this trilogy, so I'm hoping it gets even better. What's with that ominous background music?